committee meeting. So I will call it to order and let's get started. On the consent agenda, C1 and C2 were held in committee in a finance committee, so I suggest that we just hold those again.
Sure.
And does anyone want Ms. Carmen to give us an update on C3?
Please.
Please? Okay.
Are there any particular questions regarding any of the items, or just want to go through the package?
I'm interested in if there's been any change in the stance that we know of. I mean,
I assume you're talking about historic tax credits, maybe?
particularly, yeah, we've gotten a lot of requests for information on it and a lot of support from constituents about
I'm not
favor of that.
aware of any changes. My understanding is still scheduled to sunset at the end of this year. I'm not sure if Councilmember Adams has heard anything
No.
different.
No.
Unfortunately, I think it's still the same as it was about a month or two ago.
And certainly we've heard via the media about how many fewer requests for film jobs there are. So
Yeah, I'd just note I've gotten 3 or 4 emails today from folks urging us to support the historic preservation tax credit and the film tax credit. And I've responded to everybody that, as far as I know, that's an item of consensus support among the council members. We do support those, and unfortunately, that's not the case with the legislatures. So I would encourage folks who are particularly concerned about those items to contact their legislators directly, knowing that the city supports renewal of those tax credits, but they need to help us persuade their legislators to do so.
It's my understanding that all of our delegation members actually support
They do.
Forsyth County legislative delegation.
One of the things that we do know, and we've heard from, as the League of Municipalities Board of Directors, for some reason, it seemed like the smaller towns, I don't know what happened, but they did get it at the very end when this ball started to roll. Somehow I think they thought that only the urban cities benefited from both, and therefore I think the historic tax credits got beyond them, and the ball had started rolling. And now they realize, from what we're hearing and from the board, that they want to keep that one. So we may see some action, Attorney Carmen, where they keep the historic part, because we know that the smaller rural urban towns are in desperate need of revitalization, and they somehow are embracing that one. I would not be surprised if that one somehow comes back to life, but the film doesn't. I wouldn't be surprised.
anything else? A group of us are actually going to Raleigh on Thursday to be a part of the process in urging acceptance of all of these.
Madam Chair, I did have an update, and I don't know if I was thinking maybe at the end of the agenda if there was time for the Advocacy Goals Conference on Thursday. One of the items I had done some work on, but I can make that report at the end of the agenda. If that's
very good. Very good. Thank you. All right, we'll move to the general agenda. Pardon?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Okay. All righty. I guess so. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Is there another item on consent?
C4, yeah, the minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right.
Discussion on amending the city code related to disqualifying bidders.
This item is for discussion only, and this draft amendment came about due to recent concerns about contractors not paying subcontractors or not paying subcontractors in a timely manner or in a timely fashion. This particular item, if that occurs on more than one occasion and without a reasonable basis, would allow the city to initiate the process to disqualify a contractor from bidding on future city contracts. And if that contractor is so disqualified, the contractor can appeal what in essence is the city manager's decision to disqualify the bidder or the contractor to the city council. That disqualification period may last up to 3 years. This particular item, if you refer back to your Finance Committee agenda, item G4 regarding MWBE, one of the recommendations relates to payment of or the payment history of general contractors to subcontractors. And it notes that if a negative pattern or history exists regarding a poor payment history, then steps should be taken regarding corrective actions or the GC or general contractor be suspended from bidding with the city of Winston-Salem. So this particular item, that's for discussion only, would be an enforcement mechanism for that particular recommendation for the MWBE program. But again, essentially, it's a mechanism to allow the city to disqualify contractors who are not paying their subcontractors in a timely manner or at all, for that matter.
I have heard rumors that there are some contractors who are notorious for this. Has the city ever had to become involved in forcing contractors to make those payments?
We have. Normally what happens is if there's a payment bond, the attorney for the subcontractor will request a copy of the payment bond to basically initiate the payment process under that bond. So that's one mechanism, but I think this additional mechanism will serve to discourage contractors for failing to make those payments and encourage them to make them in a timely manner. So yes, we have had that to happen, and on occasion we've had it to happen where we could use another prong on a disqualification to try to remove the bidder from the list. But I think it's better to have more direct language to that point and use that as the basis to remove the bidder.
Very good.
What evidence would have to be presented for, say, to characterize somebody as a continual late payer? Or
It just happens on more than one occasion, and basically you would look at the contract, you look at the arrangement between the general contractor and the subcontractor, and what the payment requirements are under that particular contract, and whether or not that payment has been made. And there may be a reasonable basis for delaying that payment, i.e. the subcontractor has not complied with his obligations under the contract, in which case the city could say, well, that's a reasonable basis, and so we will not consider that failure to timely pay that subcontractor as a basis for removing them from the bid list.
do you foresee us getting drawn into the role of being an arbitrator?
We are anyway. 9 times out of 10, we are anyway.
We don't see that increasing.
It
Yes.
may to some degree, but I think we're probably in a better position to serve that role than maybe some other folks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say that I have heard this as a complaint from several small businesses and their organizations that they belong to. As we all know, a small business, they don't have a lot of cash flow, and they don't, they depend on their money coming to them as their job is done and completed. And when they're not paid, it has a rippling effect to small businesses, vis-a-vis their employees, the 1 or 2 that they have, their families, all kinds of things happen. And it could ultimately, some of them say, almost destroy their businesses. So I think this is a very positive move, again, for the city of Winston-Salem, that we are very serious about promoting small business and holding our larger businesses accountable when they do contract them to work with them, that they are getting paid duly and justly. I think this is very good.
I will make one change. going to hold that against me now. It's occurred the second time, and so we're looking at a 5-year look at it.
Right.
So I will make that change.
Right.
This is for information only, so, if there are no other questions, we will move on.
Want me to bring it back, I guess, in
Yes.
January?
That sounds great.
Update on electronic sweepstakes operations.
Okay. Oh, okay, Jerry, you're going to do this.
Good afternoon. At your October meeting, the committee advised staff to explore some possible changes to the zoning ordinance in order to address spacing requirements and also to set forth some limitations upon the hours of operation of the electronic sweepstakes operation. Before I get into the details of the draft ordinance, I wanted to at least highlight some of the information, some of the additional information that was requested by the committee in October. You'll see that information both in the memorandum as well as the attachments that accompany the memorandum. First item that I wanted to highlight, there was a question with regard to the number of privilege licenses issued over the years, and you'll see before you the last 5 fiscal years. And I just wanted you to note that, of course, initially over the first 3 years there was a rise in the number of licenses issued, but over the past 2 years that number has come down, and there have been a total of 29 privilege licenses issued this fiscal year. Of those 29 licenses issued, there are currently 26 electronic sweepstakes operations doing business in the city of Winston-Salem. Of those 26 operations, 7 of those will be affected by the amortization provision and will either have to be rezoned or shut down by July 1 of 2015. I've also attached some relevant portions of Chapter 18B, and those are general statutes governing the ABC permits, and I wanted you to note the separation considerations and hours for sale and consumption that are set forth in those statutes. Additionally, the Planning and Development Services Department prepared a sweepstakes location spacing analysis. This particular map illustrates the location of the operations in relation to the neighborhood revitalization statistical area, but it also illustrates buffer areas at different separation standards, and it also illustrates the locations that we need to amortize by July 1, 2015. The draft, the proposed ordinance amending the UDO that you have before you has both a spacing component and an hours of operation component. The spacing requirement would prohibit electronic sweepstakes operations from locating within a distance of 1,000 feet from any other electronic sweepstakes operation, any residential zoning district, whether it be RM or RS, public or private schools, child daycare centers, or churches or other religious institutions. This recommendation, the 1,000 feet, is similar to that for adult establishments. I did want to point out, however, that we incorporated the adult establishment separation requirements do not specify a separation requirement from churches or other religious institutions. We have brought that into this draft and incorporated it and drew that out of the ABC regulations. Did also want to point out, just for transparency and also to note the differences, that the separation requirements for shelters for the homeless as well as family group homes C's, those separation distances are 2,500 square feet. The difference, the distinction there is that those separation requirements are merely between another use, i.e. another homeless shelter or between group homes themselves, and they don't add that other component of the churches, the residences, the daycares. We also looked into, there was a question regarding the ability to add an amortization period with the separation requirements, and we've looked into that, and it is legally permissible. If we were to go, and in case you're interested in the impact that would have, if you were to go with 1,000-foot separation requirement, that would impact, again, of the 26, it would actually leave, as I mentioned before, there's 7 that would have to amortize. So of those 19 remaining, that would impact 5 distinct locations where there are 2 electronic sweepstakes operations within 1,000 square feet. So I wanted to point that impact out to you, and also further explain in case there is a question, you know, if there are 2 within 1,000 feet, and you do put in an amortization provision, what happens? The implication would be that the electronic sweepstakes operation that established that use first would get to remain, and the one coming later in time would have to move. If an amortization period is something that you would like to consider, we looked at it and we would recommend a period of 36 months to allow the businesses time to recoup their investment. It would also allow them time, giving the initial narrowing to the HB zoning district. This would narrow it, of course, even further to a certain square footage, and we feel that a 36-month time frame would be adequate for them to recoup their investments and find another suitable location. Finally, we also looked further into calls for service of these electronic sweepstakes operation, and where these operations were also within a shopping center, we also gathered that information as well. You will find that before you. I did want to point out, we did include calls for service for all 26 locations, but again, for transparency, there are 2 locations which serve as accessory uses, so we did not look closely at that data because it's uncertain what the customer was there for, whether it was for an electronic sweepstakes machine or some other business transaction. We also did not look at false alarms because essentially there's no specific crime we could wrap our hands around and point to, but you will see highlighted, to the extent we were able to identify a call for service being generated as a result of an electronic sweepstakes operation. You will see those items highlighted. Also, for clarification, you'll see some yellow highlights and some green highlights. The yellow highlights indicate that those calls for service, all of those calls for service came from the electronic sweepstakes operation, where you see a green highlight, only a few of those calls came from an electronic sweepstakes operation. In the upper left-hand corner, that number represents the number that came from the operation itself. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Go ahead.
One comment. Thank you very much for providing the service calls data. I know it wasn't easy, but I appreciated the way you broke it out and you made it happen for us. As this, like you said, the data shows that we don't get that many calls at all to the sweepstakes place, except, like the comment said, when there are people in the parking lot that seem the customers seem uneasy when they're leaving the establishment. Maybe it's because they've won like $2,000 or $3,000 and they don't want to go in the parking lot. I can understand that, but we appreciate that. The areas on the map, and we appreciate the map also. The areas on the map where you said there were 5 locations or locations of establishments where they were close. Are those the ones where the 2 dots, the red dots, are right up on top of each other? You got,
There, you will
and you
see-
got them encompassed in the green together, like a double egg or
Yes.
something?
You will notice, you'll,
Yeah, that's it, double yolk and stuff.
okay.
Yeah. I guess the one at the top, the very top at 12 o'clock, and the one right below it, those are considered locations that what? And I see your legend down here, but what are you saying the distance non-compliance would be for those establishments?
Well, as proposed right now in the draft ordinance, the separation would be 1,000 feet. So anywhere that you see the intersection of
Inside the blue?
this. So to answer your question directly, yes, both of those on the northern quadrant would be locations that are within.
And also the one below it? And the one over there? Yeah, that's 3, 4, and then you got 5 down at the bottom. Okay, good, very good.
And this is one outlier to the east is what's the road?
It's Walton, Reynolds Park.
Reynolds Park Road.
It's a
Southeast.
Kernersville and High Point.
Probably
There,
Southeast Plaza.
Rancho,
Southeast.
El Rancho.
Southeast Plaza.
Southeast Plaza. Okay, got it. Got it. Yeah.
Have you, one more question,
Sure.
I'm sure. Have we heard, we've been asking each other, have we heard anything in the past, I'll say 5, 4 years since we started down this road from the sweepstakes owners as to some of the things that we've been doing, like initially the taxing and some other things?
I think initially I heard in terms of the privilege license from a few of them, that they wanted to make sure it wasn't exorbitant. So we worked through that and came up with a reasonable rate and so forth. And after that, when we looked at limiting them to HD, there was an establishment that's in a LD, maybe 2 actually, that complained about that.
An
fact that they
EP.
had to basically shut down June, July 1st next year. But that was about the time the ordinance was adopted. I haven't really heard much since then.
Thank you, Attorney.
That's, and the one on Acadia that's in pedestrian business, zoning, that was going to send his mother to the poorhouse.
That was one of the,
Yeah.
When does the privilege license income go away?
July 1st, 2015.
So, so that's same time as one of. Am I right in saying that the only reason these exist in our community right now is because they're basically using a legal loophole to be in existence? We would shut them down were it not for those
For
loopholes?
the time being, yeah.
Okay.
We're still looking at that. And
So-
I suspect the General Assembly may look at it again in one session.
So I guess my question goes to, if we're going to create an ordinance to try to eliminate as many of these as possible, why wouldn't we just go all the way and create extremely large separation distances between them and extremely short hours? They're not giving anything back to the community once the privilege license income goes away. I don't know if there's any evidence that these people are good citizens and support any kind of charitable operations in the city of Winston-Salem.
I understand your concern, but you're still going to have an ordinance that's reasonable and valid and it's going to be able to withstand legal challenge. So we're kind of looking at what distances exist right now with respect to other establishments in the UDO, and we don't have any other operations that would limit their hours, except you do have the ABC provisions in the statute, so we sort of looked at that in terms of the hours. And we looked at the other establishments in the ordinance in terms of spacing requirements, and then we did add on top of having the spacing requirements between the same type of establishment, the additional limitation based upon church and school, which we think are reasonable.
But there are other municipalities that don't allow them at all, is that correct?
There
They're-
are some that don't allow them at all, and there are some that are still going through the same process that we are. And,
Thank
you know, we're in constant communication with the DA's office, and we'll be once again in terms of if council decides that it wants to basically not allow them at all, are they going to assist us in making sure that the establishments are closed? And I think right now, based on our last communication with the DA's office, because of where the law stands at this point in time, we're just not comfortable taking that.
But if we were to go by what some other municipalities are using as far as limits on hours separation, we pretty comfortably say that we would be immune. So why don't we just look at the largest separation that other municipalities are using, the shortest period of time that other municipalities are allowing them, and impose those.
I think we're in line with what most of them are doing, and that's what we would propose. As
Yeah.
opposed to going to the extremes. And again, I think, if in some of those municipalities, I think you have a situation where you have the city and the DA's office coming down on the same side in terms of what enforcement action should take place. So if there's a municipality that says we're not going to allow them, then they've got a DA's office that's willing to basically say, okay, they're illegal and we're going to prosecute. But where you don't have that type of enforcement, then you have a situation where they're allowed and you have reasonable regulations, so the type of dispute goes up.
A couple of things. One, I think the distinction in part is between use of the police power authority and use of our land use and zoning authority. And anything we do via the land use has to be based on factors that are reasonably considerable under that.
Absolutely.
So, I think that conceptually what's proposed in the draft ordinance here meets that category, legitimate land use and zoning considerations. I think it could probably be tightened legitimately to address those considerations more vigorously. The other question, the use of the police power, I think is a little more complex in the enforcement question. Query here. You've got a dual authority in that the police force is the enforcing agency, the district attorney's office is the prosecuting agency. Is it theoretically possible for an operation to be padlocked by the police as illegal under the interpretation of the local law enforcement agency, and the district attorney simply to decline to prosecute, so it's not criminally pursued, but the business is shut down?
Yeah.
I mean, if we were to conclude that we want to pursue an interpretation of the law that follows that of the many other communities in the state who have determined that state law prohibits these operations and that they're operating under a facade, could we simply do so and have that enforced as a matter of the businesses are not allowed to operate, and the DA simply prosecute or not as he and his staff consider wise?
I know in municipalities where they're doing that, of course they're doing it in conjunction with the DA's office, but we can certainly look at that. I don't know if Jerry has any thoughts about that now.
Off the top of my head, I don't, but we'll look into that, certainly.
I think from the community standpoint, the question is not so much prosecution. The question is whether under legitimate police power authority, is this a pernicious operation to the from the standpoint of the community?
And to go back to Jeff's question, in fact, if you look at this, further separation is really not going to do much more than 1,000 foot because they're pretty widely spread throughout the city. So, I mean, even if you made it half a mile, most of them would still remain. So, is that?
Yes.
Every one of those, man, shut down.
Attorney, both of you, because we know what's happening in the legislature concerning sweepstakes, it's kind of like the privilege tax and a couple of other, the tax credits and a couple of other items. Where, again, and I've asked this, how do we stand compared to where compliance will be to the general statute or the state? Because you got to know, and you know, attorney, these sweepstakes have interests and lobbyists down there that are also keeping them like somewhat safe so they can operate. And most of the municipalities are in a position where they can't really do much to them because they have some type of protection from the state. What is that protection, and where would we be if we did move forward, as Councilmember Bessie said?
I do believe during this long session, we may see more activity from the lobbyists for the sweepstakes operations, in a sense that they are willing to be taxed, and I think perhaps now may be a good time for the General Assembly to look at taxing those establishments as a source of revenue. So I do believe that in light of some recent activity, they will probably position the General Assembly to allow them to remain in existence and to be taxed.
Thank you.
I did also want to interject something Mr. Murphy pointed out that I neglected to clarify. The map before you, that only indicates businesses not meeting the separation requirements as they relate to other sweepstakes operations. If there were an amortization period enacted, then we would also look at, of course, the distance from, if it is as proposed, residences, churches, and schools. So there may, aside from those businesses indicated, there may be, and I apologize for not pointing this out, these other businesses may very well be affected as well if an amortization period were to be enacted.
I just want to make a comment about the amortization process, and I think most people think about that term in terms of their mortgage. And I know it's the same. It's a sunsetting of, but I want to make the distinction that this is a very short period of time where you think about an amortization on a loan.
Right.
It's typically a 20 or 30-year period, but we're talking about a 36-month period
Right.
in this discussion.
So what would you like to recommend, that staff take this back to look at, complete padlocking of these buildings instead of doing this? Or do you think that we're going to run into a conflict with the legislature?
I wouldn't put all our eggs in that basket. I think that I'd like to have staff, investigate that question and report back. But I think that independently of that, if we think there is merit, which I do, in the hours of operation restriction and the spacing requirement, that we ask for some version of those to move forward, and I haven't concluded what.
And it's also interesting to me because I suspect, I don't know how far 1,000 feet is, but I suspect that some of these may actually run into being near residential or some of the other items. So,
The churches.
Yeah.
It's less than a quarter of a mile.
so.
One thing's for sure, I've looked at some of them here just because that's the outer green circle is the 2,500. If you went to 2,500, which I know is pushing it, I think you'd probably get them, almost all of them would be with close to a residential district. You went 2,500.
to see us, I'd like to see, come back and show us what the most aggressive stance we can take is that we think we can defend on distance and operating hours.
And if we do that, say, in January, is that reasonable? So that, because we're up against the deadline on some of the applications that have been made that are due in March. So, yeah. Would that give us time? Would that be adequate time?
It's probably pushing up against the time here at the map board, anyone's on yours, I think it's March 2nd, but we'll know for sure, so it's kind of tight.
Okay, but I guess we can always continue it again. So, okay, all right. Any other questions or requests?
I do have one question.
Yeah.
So we are looking at putting the immunization schedule in for the 6 months, because it wasn't in the draft, only because it came up as a sort of a sidebar conversation the last time. Did you want to put it in?
Yeah, I would think it would have to be, yeah.
And then maybe 2,500 feet?
Yeah, maybe 20. Yeah, uh-huh.
And when this comes back, do you want an analysis of all 26 and how this will affect it? Right. Okay.
Yeah, and especially adding in the other child care, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, lovely, thank
Thank
you. Anything else? Yes.
For the Advocacy Goals Conference, we had discussed, among other things, a concern with one of the federal advocacy goals, and regarding the draft rulemaking that's under review now by the Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on defining waters in the United States. I've done some further work on that and have a draft proposal that I discussed with the state league's advocacy staff. My initial concern with that goal, as it was phrased, to oppose any expansion of what would qualify as waters in the United States for protection under the federal EPA and Corps of Engineers guidelines, was to react that, in fact, what they were proposing is not an expansion. Now, in discussing that, I acknowledge that there are interest groups who contend that it is an expansion. And where the argument comes in, just brief background, is what you consider an expansion from. The historical definition that has been used by the EPA is basically what they're proposing to restore. Some of the opposition advocacy organizations say that that's not what they are currently enforcing, and therefore it's an expansion. So there is an argument going on about whether it's an expansion or not, and if so, whether it's a good idea or not. My suggestion for the state league would be, let's avoid getting in that food fight, and let's just specify what cities' discrete interests are in the definitional question. And so I did a proposed redraft that I would propose to present to the goals conference discussion on Thursday, that I think would pursue the reasonable city concerns that are raised without getting us into the argument about whether the proposed rulemaking is an expansion or not an expansion. I don't think it is. And what the draft here does, in lieu of the language that came out of the rulemaking committee of the league, oppose federal regulatory changes that expand the jurisdictional reach of the Clean Water Act, say And this is actually fairly close to what the league staff originally proposed. Seek clarification of the EPA's proposed definition of the waters of the United States to address municipalities' concerns, including the following: exempting from jurisdictional waters human-made ditches, and in fact, EPA says that's not what we're going after, so this would be a clarification. And exempting from jurisdictional waters municipal separate storm sewer systems, MS4s. And these are human-made systems to address stormwater. And I think there is a good argument that that's not what EPA and the Corps are trying to get at in the first place. Well, let's just put it in there explicitly, knock out cities' main concerns and just say, okay, and y'all can fight it out over whether there's an expansion or not in some of these other areas. That keeps us out of that debate, ensures that our input is meaningful and specific, and sort of lifts us in the attention, I think, of the EPA and the Corps beyond kind of the background noise of the argument about whether there's basically an expansion proposed or not, and said, we just want to make sure that cities' needs are dealt with in this. And so this is what I would propose to present for discussion on Thursday.
Have you talked to the league?
Yeah,
You
talked to
said?
the league staff
Yeah.
about this, and actually their analyst thinks this is reasonable.
Okay,
Now, they're not in a position to advocate,
Yeah.
but, we discussed it. I sent it to them for their review, and earlier this week, we talked about it this morning, and, they say this is clear, this would do what they were originally suggesting, and it's just a matter of what form the league membership would prefer. I can make the pitch, and they can either say yay or nay.
Okay.
Hold it up or down.
Yeah.
Sounds good, sounds good.
If y'all like it, I would sort of seek your support in spreading the word to other members that are there.
All right. Is this something we should,
We need to amend.
No.
I think that's, because you all indicated you were dissatisfied with that.
Right.
Yeah,
Again, all you're doing is substituting, satisfaction for that.
Yeah, this is a tactical application of the position that the city has already taken.
You're going to have to give us bullet points, because we can't go in there and say what you just said.
I will do that. I will do that.
Yeah.
okay, well, thank you for studying that and bringing it forward. That's very good.
Thank you.
So we're headed off on Thursday. It's,
7.
He's driving. To be on time.
will you be awake?
I'm going to Wednesday night.
Okay.
I have something on my
Yeah, please.
Something I'd like to ask staff to look into and research for me. Look at the zoning requirements for people to be able to put playgrounds and parks in residential areas and developments, neighborhoods, appropriately beside people's houses and things. I think I want to be able to go back and look at that. I don't know whether we have something in place, but I think we need to look at that. Okay, can we get that? Thanks.
If there's nothing else, we're adjourned.
Thank you.